Hey there everybody, Steve the Amateur Historian. Coming up to 3rd and Morrison. I'm trying to get down by the waterfront. It's getting a little bit dicey around here, but doing the best I can with what I got to work with. Because I've got an interesting story to bring to you that I discovered just kind of trying to dig through local Portland cold cases. And found an interesting one. Likely 2 murders that weren't caused by probably the same person. Not even through my intro yet, and I'm already having to change the direction. Maybe I picked the wrong day to do this. Anyway, I'm trying to get down by the freaking waterfront. Well, in order to get to where I want to go, I have to cut through some uncharted terrain. I don't know what awaits me around here. The waterfront is definitely a mixed bag. You're either going to encounter a lot of people you don't want to encounter, or it's just nice and quiet. But I'm trying to get to a place that's approximately a third of a city block north of the Morrison Bridge, which this is all the like on-ramp and stuff leading up there. So I want to be just this side of it. And what I'm going to be bringing to you is 2 murder cases. Jesus, what did they do to this outhouse? That's unfortunately been happening a lot. There's a outhouse over by where I work that's been burned down twice. But I'm trying to get to the waterfront, which is dead ahead, to bring you 2 stories that have amazing similarities and were likely the work of the same person. It's officially turning into a I gotta keep an eye over my shoulder type of video. It looks chill through here, but man, getting here was something else. It was so nice when the day started, wasn't it, fellas? All right, so here is the Morrison Bridge as it goes out, crosses the river. In the early morning hours of September 2nd, 1986, a 22-year-old male named Terrence Demildenhall was found shot to death near the seawall, which is just where the railing is. There's a wall there, so he was close to this railing. And about a third of a block north of the bridge, so if that's 1 block down, I'd probably line it up with this pole. This is probably kind of over where all these geese are. Demildenhall was a transient living on the streets, and he was last seen alive in this area around 12:30 a.m. and was discovered just a very short while later. So if I had to approximate it, he was probably sleeping kind of where these are, probably in this area, again, near the seawall, which, yeah, if I walk up to it and you look over the edge, you can see it's just a wall leading down to the river. So Demildenhall, not long after he was last seen in this same area alive, he was found dead. Someone had come through here and shot him to death, and he had just been sleeping here. He was in a sleeping bag, and he'd been shot in the head by some passerby and just left here sometime during the early morning hours. And you know, early morning hours in the city, yeah, it's downtown and it's the city, but you know, most of the only people that are out that late are transients. So authorities are contacted. They report to the scene here and discover, obviously, Demildenhall's been shot in the head. He is no longer with us. He's passed away. And law enforcement has a cold case now, or what became a cold case, but they have a case on their hands that is likely to become such because Demildenhall is unfortunately just another transient on the streets, which back in the 80s, like certainly there, you know, every major city has, you know, some homeless issue, but In Portland, it hadn't, remotely become what it is today, which is what been making it so difficult for me just to get from point A to point B over here. I hear a few people yelling at each other. Well, there's some yelling going down. I don't like that. There's been shootings, a lot of shootings between homeless people recently, so I'm trying to just avoid them altogether. But yeah, it's a case that's it's unlikely to get solved because people probably aren't, law enforcement's they're not going to be as invested in a case like this of a transient getting killed as other people. But had it just ended with the murder of Terrence Demildenhall, that would be one thing. But this is only the first half of the overall story, and we don't have to walk far to get to the next part. So just for a point of reference, there's the Morrison Bridge. I'm not too far up from it. And just a few blocks north up here, this is the Burnside Bridge. So it's the next bridge up. They're separated by, 6-7 blocks. So relatively close to one another. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to be in this area. I know Burnside is a kind of homeless haven. There's a lot of people there. And it's the fringe of Chinatown, which I won't go for the foreseeable future. I will not go through there. I don't know if it's really that bad underneath the Burnside Bridge here near the river, but just know I don't really know 100% what awaits me here. Maybe nothing, but I may be kind of passing through relatively quickly. As I say all this, we're finishing our approach to the Burnside Bridge. This crosses over all of Waterfront, and eventually drops down to street level over there. So we had to fast forward to February 27th, 1987. It's a few months down the road since Terrence Demildenhall was found shot to death in his sleeping bag just north of the Morrison Bridge. Another transient who'd actually just recently come to Portland, a 36-year-old man named Fred Edgi, was also living on the streets, but unlike Demildenhall, who I don't really know how long he'd been here in the city, how long he'd been a transient, but Demildenhall was apparently a very talented amateur artist who had recently come to Portland, maybe to find work, but I don't know if he just didn't plan it out well or what, but he came to town and he was apparently, for the time being, just sleeping on the streets. Maybe that may have been by choice. He may have had not a lot of money, and he may have just thought, if I'm going to come to the city, I'm going to have to do it on the cheap, so this is just how I'm going to do it. So it's actually relatively quiet under here. So I'm about to, sorry for the leaf blower, those are all over this city, but I'm walking under the Burnside Bridge. I wouldn't dare go 2 blocks that way, not right now. But under the bridge here is where Fred Edgi had set up his camp, so to speak. And he was just sleeping somewhere between what would have been Front Avenue, which is the Nato Parkway, which is just this first street over here, and the river, which of course is just right down there, and whatever's down there. So he was sleeping somewhere in this vicinity. And while Edgi was presumably sleeping here under the bridge, someone came up to him and shot him in the head. So we had another guy just in his sleeping bag, just trying to get some sleep, at a location just a few blocks north from where Terrence Demildenhall was found dead. So we now have two, they were referred to generally as the sleeping bag murders. And as far as we know, there was only 2 cases of these. There could have been more. I mean, sometimes you never know. With people that are living on the streets, sometimes their cases just get missed. But now, over the span of a few months, in 1986 and 87, we have 2 almost identical crimes. Probably, some killer targeting a more than vulnerable victim. So we have 2 transients, both killed in similar fashions, under similar circumstances, both during the early morning hours. They were both reportedly heavy drinkers, although I don't really know exactly what that has to do with the case, but that was more information that was posted about them. And it was loosely theorized that maybe this could have been the work of another homeless person, perhaps just somebody seizing an opportunity, or maybe someone that had a bone to pick with one or both of these guys. But even law enforcement kind of thought that was kind of a very light possibility, probably not super likely. Sorry, it seemed more like just somebody seized an opportunity. If you find a sketchy enough person, some people just want to kill. Some people deem that certain individuals are a drag on society. They live on the fringes, and given the right person, homeless people, sex workers, people like that, they can be deemed less important, less significant than others, even worthy of death because they're just a drag on society. And people will, kill them. That's happened in the past. That might be what happened here, considering the victims. And if that's the case, it seems altogether, whatever the circumstances, it seems unlikely that the guilty party probably knew either of these men. One of them had lived here for at least a little while. The other one had just recently come to town. They happened months apart. I doubt there was there couldn't have been a connection between the 2 men, because Edgi wasn't even in Portland when Demildenhall was killed. But yeah, I don't see how it could be done for robbery when you're talking about somebody who's homeless. What are the odds that they're going to have a bunch of expensive items or cash on them? It seems to me like this was just one of those senseless killings. Either somebody had thought homeless people were lesser individuals and thus didn't really deserve to live, or just, somebody getting their kicks off of killing defenseless people. In this instance, people who weren't only homeless but were also asleep, couldn't even defend themselves. And I don't know if this was ever considered, but something that's worthy to mention is during the late 80s, there was a really high population of what were called street kids. A lot of young people, teenagers, who were living on the streets in Portland. Some just ended up homeless. Some people were teenagers who came to Portland. And there were a lot of them, and a lot of them were, especially if they got into these families, as they were referred to, they could be pretty violent, and they would take advantage of anybody that couldn't match up with them. I know there's at least one instance of one of these families that they were involved in few murders and attempted murders, and a lot of those particular groups, street kids in general back then, but a lot of families, again, they lived down near the river. They lived along the waterfront. So potentially any, random one of these street kids could have been lingering in this area, killing people when the opportunity presented itself. I think that's absolutely a possibility. And it's important to remember, one of these cases happened in 1986, the other early in 1987. 1987, up until last year, was the most deadliest year in the history of Portland. So there was a lot of crimes going on, a lot of shootings, a lot of murders, and these may just tie into those. And that's where I wrapped while filming on scene, because big shocker, there I was on that little walking bridge crossing underneath the steel bridge, And the only other 3 people that were on the bridge with me both looked cracked out of their minds. And I realized I need to pay attention to my surroundings, and I probably don't want to just be waving my cell phone around. But I was practically finished discussing the matter altogether in a case that is, well, 2 cases that are now past 35 years since they've happened, and it's very unlikely they'll ever get solved. I don't know who this far down the road would even be that invested, unfortunately, considering the fact that these were both people on the streets. Unfortunately, a lot of people, the circumstances that the person who fell victim were living play a key factor in how much attention people pay to it, who they are, or if the circumstances of their death have a wild or crazy backstory to them. That'll sometimes keep people's attention. But these were just 2 guys trying to sleep it off in their sleeping bags down by the waterfront, just trying to make it through another day, make it to tomorrow. And someone saw to it that that didn't happen. And I really don't think we'll ever know who was responsible in these shootings, because if you had to ask me, I think the strongest likelihood is that it was another person living on the streets, or at least somebody who was off and on living on the streets. And there was a lot of violence, again, going on back during this time, the late 80s into the 90s and even into the 2000s, of, again, younger people living on the streets. And obviously, I mean, nowadays, that just recently, when they were discussing all the shootings that have happened in 2022, I heard the police reported, they think a lot of them are drug or gang related, but a lot of them are also homeless, shootings being done by homeless people, either shooting at random people or shooting at each other. Obviously, the circumstances that are bringing about things like that now compared to this case are different, but, the simple fact of the matter is a lot of people think all homeless people on the streets, especially those that have drug addictions or suffer of any kind of mental disorders or disabilities or anything like that, a lot of people think they're just all dangerous. They're all criminals waiting to attack somebody, which, with as much concerning encounters I've had in the past year and a half or so with homeless people wandering the streets, the fact of the matter is the vast majority of them aren't going to attack you. But under these circumstances, I really do think it was probably somebody else who was living on the streets. It may have been somebody who lived in the area, who maybe walked the waterfront periodically, who had that dark desire to shoot somebody and saw some easy, vulnerable victims. These people were asleep when they were killed, in no position to defend themselves. And probably, it seems like there was nobody around. It's the waterfront in the middle of the night. And I found no information stating that any witnesses saw any people in the area who might be responsible. So we don't even have a general, vague description of the person responsible. I don't think we'll ever know, unfortunately. And that is my brief dive. There's not really a whole lot of information on it, but it is a very intriguing case. 2 murders that I really feel they have to be connected with each other. They have to be the work of the same killer, or killers if anybody was working together, but it's probably just one person as far as I can see. And it's intriguing, and it gets a little bit of attention from time to time, but it is still kind of one of these cases that generally just kind of gets lost in the mix of all of the unsolved murders that have happened in Portland over the last 40, 50 years. So thank you so much for stopping by. Those of you that did, if you're new to the channel or haven't gotten around to it, remember to give the video a like, share it around if you so choose, subscribe to the channel. If you like what I'm doing and you want to see more, I have hundreds of videos on this channel. And if you also want to help me out, I have a Patreon that I'm honestly, in present day, might try leaning a little heavily into, because I might need a little bit more in the future. It is what it is. But if you want to help me out there, make my job a little easier as I'm going out and trying to do these videos. The link to my Patreon is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Facebook, my Instagram, my Reddit subreddit, and my TikTok as well. So all that said, thank you so much again for stopping by. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian.